Hi, it's Ian and welcome back to my 30 Days of Knife Skills. This is day 27 and I am working with celery. So the first thing with celery, I think most of us just pull one of the stalks off and just rip it off instead of cutting them off. And as a result, we're left with these kind of rough and not the cleanest spots. So usually the first thing I would do is take that off. The other side is usually, unless it's extremely fresh, usually it's kind of dried out or rough looking. So I would normally take off the very end as well. Sometimes the outer ones also have this kind of rougher spot like this, so maybe I'll trim that off. That, something like that. Okay, so I don't see peeling celery quite as common outside of Japan, but in Japan it seems like it's quite common to actually peel or take the strings out. So one possible way is to take a little bit from the end, and you don't need to use a knife necessarily, but it helps to get a little cut started. And if there are strings, to try to peel some of them off. So this one doesn't seem to want to come off. It could be because it's kind of dried out. So that's one way to do it, is to actually peel the stringiness off. But I think the other way that's easier is to use a vegetable peeler like this. So just going down and peeling off the very outer layer. This would be a little bit easier if you take off this end piece. So I'm not sure how common that is outside of Japan, but since I see it in Japanese technique so much, it's something I would do for eating raw. So for eating raw, I think maybe the most common way that I like to do it is to take a piece like this and go in half, and then that could be okay, or maybe go in half again. So you have these sort of de-stringed, sort of tender celery sticks like this. So that's probably the most common way I would just put it on a plate with some miso or something like that. It's really good. It could be maybe done in thirds like this, if you want a little bit more surface area to grab a dip. So quarters or thirds lengthwise, like something like that might be okay. Something like this, it's hard to know. It might be a little bit rough on the bottom here, but if I was going to put it on the same plate, I would probably put it into 4 or 5 pieces, something like that, to go along with it. So that would be the raw technique. There's also ways you can do a quick pickle on celery, and since it sort of stays semi-raw, it might be a good idea to peel. But for anything where I'm cooking it, usually I do not peel, especially anything that I'm cutting up very small, then I wouldn't necessarily bother peeling. So I think maybe the most common way for people to cut celery is just in chunks like this. I would do this for long cooked soups, stew, or just making stock, things like that. Japanese curry, things like that, I would just cut it into chunks because I don't want it to break down and get too mushy or kind of get lost in the sauce. So that's very common. Of course, we could do something much smaller like this. This might be good for a quicker cook and you're trying to make it incorporate into other smaller ingredients, like maybe peas and corn and some finely diced onions or something, sauteing at the same time. That might be a good thing to do. But I'm not a huge fan of doing this too much. So I don't usually do this too much unless it's just a quick job that I need to quickly slice up some celery. Something I might do is to go on a bias like this. So getting this kind of piece. So that might be sort of a variation on this. Looks a little bit nicer to me. I might do that. But if I'm going to do a shape sort of like this, I'm more likely to cut it in half and then do the bias cut like this. So I like this shape a lot better than this shape. I don't know if it's just aesthetics or just the way it seems more even instead of having this kind of this rounded U shape, and same with this. So that's something that I would do much more often, is to I would do that on the whole thing. I would just cut the whole thing lengthwise and then do the bias cut. So that could be done much more thinly or longer. This could be great on a cold noodle dish. If this was a little bit thicker, then you could take this and go in half one more time into a small stick, and then get this kind of very long sort of julienne shape. So I'm not worrying too much about getting it too thin. Something like this, especially with a little bit of salt in it, it would help break it down and make it easier to eat. So this area is more what I would do, plus this. And these, that's a very common celery shape, but I don't really do that too much. Another cut that I don't do that much, but I've seen people perform, is to go on a bias this way. So being very careful. So this kind of shape, going on a bias instead of this way, going this way. Not sure what I would necessarily use it for. It's a little bit scary to cut into it this way. I'm not sure if I would be able to get the same control this way. It seems a little bit more challenging, maybe less dangerous this way. This I think is a great job for a mandolin. So start it on a bias and then get some nice thin pieces this way. So if I tried cutting this, maybe I would find more applications. Of course, you could take this, stack it up, and maybe cut it into, from the boomerang shape into this kind of a unusual shape like this. I could see this being in a stir fry. It's thin enough and it's quite even, so it's sort of a variation on this, except it's thinner and wider. So yeah, that one I don't use that much, but I could see how it could be useful. And finally, the one last thing that we're missing is the mince. So lengthwise, nice thin sticks, stack it up. That kind of shape. So that would be great for even smaller than this application. I might make a tuna salad or egg salad or something like that and put that in there so that it adds some texture and it still doesn't get in the way. If it's too big, then it's a little bit too, I think, too hard and too firm to chew on. So anyway, that's pretty much what I do with celery. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you on the next one.